episode of Who Killed WCW on YouTube, courtesy of Vice. And maybe we'll find out some answers. Was it Eric Bischoff? Was it Hulk Hogan? Was it Vince Russo? I have no clue, but this series is produced by The Rock, so that is also a little interesting fact. And of course, as I said at the start of the stream, ladies and gentlemen, today in American history is D-Day. June 6th happened in World War II. If any of you know your American history, the Germans and the Nazis were not the original enemy for America. They became the enemy down the line. Our original enemy was Japan after they attacked Pearl Harbor, and that is what made the Americans enter World War II. Of course, the allies of Japan was Nazi Germany. So, our allies in World War II were China and Russia. The tables have kind of turned in 2024. Now, our allies are considered Germany and Japan, and our enemies are considered China and Russia. They would also, if there ever was a World War III today, China and Russia would also be aided by countries like Iran and also North Korea. Almost all of them are considered to be communist countries. South America, so countries like Peru, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, those would all be helped by America today, which to me is kind of odd because South America still has a little bit of animosity towards Americans. I have no idea why, because if there ever was a World War III, that is who would help Spanish South America, is the Americans. Puerto Rico obviously is an American territory, unless they just decide one day to fucking create a civil war, which I don't think is smart either, because again, if there ever was a World War III, you would probably want the Americans' help. So I would start treating each other like brothers and sisters and the allies that we are. Because like I said, ladies and gentlemen, the enemy nowadays, if there ever was a World War III for America, is going to be Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. I personally studied Taekwondo, which is a South Korean martial art, and I kind of remember my instructor, remember telling us, that is a martial art that they used against the North Koreans. And it is still something, we support South Korea to this day. South Korea is an ally of the American states. So, with all that little American history being said, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a moment of silence for all the people who gave their lives, who lost their lives on this day many years ago in 1944, when they did fight the Germans on the beaches of Normandy. So we will just take a moment of silence before starting this episode in remembrance of D-Day. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for honoring all of the fallen soldiers who gave their lives and also pretty much made it possible for us to do things like this today, where we can just hang out and watch some stuff on YouTube and all have a good time. So now that my little American history lesson is over, we can pretty much start up the episode now with some more history lesson, this time for pro wrestling. And we will find out, potentially, who killed WCW.
At Jack's place. The memorial train presented by Workday.
I got my money on Eric Bischoff, chat. I got the money on Eric Bischoff. It all is going to lead back to him. But here we go. We're starting up the episode now, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you, everybody, for joining me. Again, probably going to be a short episode. This isn't too long of a thing. I think it's only it's like 40, 45, 47 minutes, so only about an hour time.
Stand by.
But we are streaming here on Twitch and YouTube, so thank you everybody for taking the time to be here with me. probably going to hear a lot of stuff that I already know of, but and the audio on this is kind of loud.
A very surreal day for all of us in World Championship Wrestling, a historic day in sports entertainment, and it goes down on our very last telecast. Where does WCW go from here? What's in the cards? What's going to happen?
If I'm giving a eulogy for WCW, what would I say? We were WCW. We live, we breathe, we sweat, we paid the price to be the best.
We gather here.
I will say this before we carry on with the episode. One of the things that WCW actually did that really impressed me back in the day, they would do things like take a live show and put it right in the Mall of America in Minnesota. You would have like a literal live wrestling show happening in a mall. They did venues where strictly bikers were allowed to come. So things like Road Wild. It was only a strictly biker venue, right? So people on their motorcycles, all the bikers in the area would show up and watch some pro wrestling. That always brought it together. You know what I'm saying?
Today.
So right now they're kind of showing us a little bit of the end of the WCW era.
Who from the ashes rose to become the phoenix of professional wrestling.
The legacy of WCW is iconic. I have just such a tremendous amount of reverence and respect for everything that they were able to do. To know that it went from that to being out of business is a tragedy.
At the start of what I guess people would consider the war between WWE and WCW, WCW was dominating WWE, WWF at the time. Vince McMahon could not even fucking compete with WCW. They were known as the top dog in pro wrestling. Everything that was pro wrestling pretty much centered around WCW. And it was that way for a couple years until really the Attitude Era kicked in WWF and they started to push more guys like Stone Cold, The Rock, Triple H, etc. But for quite some time, I mean, the WWF product grew so stale and it was just not entertaining. WCW was dominating them in almost every aspect.
People thinking about themselves and not the good of the company led to the death of WCW.
Thanks to the cash.
Thanks for nothing. Go yourselves. I think that would sum it up.
You know, if I look back and tried to describe the journey, the ups, the downs, the twists, the curves, the ride all along the way was a rush. WCW innovated so many things that are still so much a part of the wrestling programming that we watch today. Going back to the 80s, early 90s, it was a little company that nobody thought was ever going to be successful. Anytime anybody talked about professional wrestling in mainstream media, they didn't refer to it as professional wrestling. They referred to it as WWF.
The world.
So here's just another little thing. What made WCW so popular with a lot of their audience as well, they had characters centered more around reality, where Vince McMahon was doing gimmick shit, right? Vince McMahon would have fucking clowns and firefighters, policemen, right? Big Boss Man. He would actually have more characters around gimmicks than actual reality. And I think part of the reason WCW did get over so well with their audience, you could relate to fucking Hulk Hogan, right? Hollywood Hulk Hogan would come out, he'd fucking do the air guitar on the championship. The rock and roll music at the time was banging, you know what I mean? They integrated way more things from pop culture and from reality than WWF ever did. And if anything, WWF took those ideas from a WCW, right?
Wrestling Federation.
If you look at where WCW started from,
Tonight on World Championship Wrestling,
we were in a different universe and not a favorable one.
So getting hit with some advertisements here. We'll be skipping these throughout the show as well. But at the start of everything, wrestling was really just territorial. And then it all became bigger promotions. The more people were offered contracts and money. So we'll start.
Very happy to be a distant number two. except for me. The difference between WCW in 93 and 98.
It's fucking night and day.
It became the most successful wrestling company in the world almost overnight.
And like I said, as well, in 93, WCW still at one of its most popular peaks, but they carried that momentum into the Attitude Era.
WCW was able to transcend pop culture.
Wow, the Stinger!
Timmy, here comes the NWO, the greatest faction ever.
I don't think I'd seen anything as hot as NWO. I was like, wow, this company's gonna go through the roof.
We were standing on top of the mountain going, how did we get here?
And then little by little, we just fell.
It was like me having a puppy, raising him to be a full-grown dog, and I watch him run across the street and he gets hit by a bus.
Egos, egos, egos.
A lot of jealousy, a lot of problems.
So I got your attention now, Eric Bischoff?
Think about it. What are wrestlers? They're a bunch of pathological liars.
So, of course, one of the biggest issues that WCW had down the line, they never utilized their full roster to its potential. And what I mean by that, WCW had a stacked roster. They had more than enough talent to compete with the WWF, even the Attitude Era at the time. You have to think about it. Some of their big stars, Goldberg, Sting, the NWO, which included Hollywood Hogan, all of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. They had more than enough talent, and even on their mid-card, you had guys like Chris Jericho. Young Chris Jericho in his prime, just came out of fucking wrestling out of Japan and Mexico. They got Chris Jericho to come over to the WCW. Even got him to leave ECW. You would get guys like Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero. I mean, all of these guys pretty much made a name for themselves in WCW before even stepping foot in a WWE ring. Now, of course, WCW only wanted to basically showcase the best of the best that they had to offer, which means the only guys that were getting main event opportunities and the only guys that would really wear a World Heavyweight Championship title were your big stars, such as a Goldberg, Sting, Hollywood Hulk Hogan. That is also what led to one of the downfalls, because what WWF would do, they would utilize more of their roster. They gave more of the roster a chance to shine, a chance to put on matches and make a name for themselves among the wrestling audience. And it is part of the reason Chris Jericho, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero all ended up basically wanting to leave for a better future, because they weren't getting those opportunities in WCW. WWE would give them those opportunities. Obviously, Chris Jericho was one of the first breakout stars for WWE when he arrived. And then later on, Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio also made names for themselves. Now basically legends within the pro wrestling community, right?
What a big word for a suit and tie.
The death of WCW is really death by 1,000 cuts. So, what really happened? Who's responsible for killing?
I mean, it literally got to the point in WCW, I don't know why they would do this, but they fucking put the championship on a Hollywood celebrity. They put their main championship, the World Heavyweight Championship, on fucking David Arquette, who, you know, not as big as a Hollywood star as he is today. But to me, it's essentially like trying to put the championship on a Logan Paul. It would just fucking kill the business. It's a very bad look for pro wrestling, and it just does not fucking make sense at all. That is the only thing I could compare it to for WCW terms, when they did put the championship on David Arquette. But you can see just how stupid that statement is by saying it, because you had all of these wrestlers who had already made careers for themselves in other countries, such as Japan and Mexico, wrestling overseas, even trying to make names for themselves in lower promotions like ECW, and then to basically get smacked in the face when WCW would just put the fucking championship on a Hollywood celebrity. It made absolutely no fucking sense. And that was part of the reason they went downfall too.
In WCW.
That's always going to be the $1 million question. Who killed WCW?
Well, the easy answer is Vince Russo.
It's just idiotic.
They're blaming Vince Russo, Chad.
The organization. lack of.
The talent killed WCW.
This guy's saying it was the talent. That's preposterous.
You have to be the person with the checkbook. It's have to be Eric Bischoff.
Because again, on your mid card, you had guys like a DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, Booker T, right? All of these guys still basically in their prime. Jeff Jarrett as well was WCW talent. But they all pretty much got put off to the side because the big draw, the big money draw was the NWO. And it was basically Hulk Hogan for Eric Bischoff. But you could only fucking, run that mile for so long. You could only do that for so long, chat. It got to a point where Hulk Hogan wasn't getting over as much as The Rock versus Stone Cold, right? People wanted to see something different.
Sometimes more than one thing can be true.
Now, here's also one of the interesting things. Probably, I'm not going to say all of you, but some of you may not know this. The main writer in the Attitude Era for the WWE, one of the main successes for WWE was their writer, Vince Russo. Vince Russo is responsible for creating characters like The Undertaker, the Ministry Undertaker, Kane, right? The Hardys, the Triple H that you see today, The Game, fucking Stone Cold, the Texas Rattlesnake. He is responsible for helping shape all of those characters. Now, when Vince McMahon basically got tired of Vince Russo, he fired him. He fired one of the greatest writers to ever help WWF basically beat their competition. And then Vince Russo went over to the rival show, right? Vince Russo joined the enemy. He joined WCW. And people sometimes say his writing for WCW is also what led to the downfall. I can't really put it all on Vince Russo, because if you look at the exact time period that Vince Russo joined, I mean, he was basically trying to fix a broken horse. You know what I'm saying? The company was already fucking going under. It was already downhill from there. He came in at probably one of the worst times trying to save them. And again, he even couldn't compete with the monster that he created in WWF.
There's too much blame to go around.
You want to hear the real story, or you want to hear the bullshit story?
You cannot sweep this under the rug.
Television show. The real reason men come in lies.
Back in the day, back prior to social media, there was still an internet culture where wrestling fans seemed to congregate and had a desperate need for an understanding of what happened to WCW, who have convinced a certain percentage of the audience that it ultimately comes back to me.
It all leads back to Eric Bischoff. And honestly, that's who you have to blame as the main promoter, as the main booker for WCW.
Say,
he led the fucking company right into the ground.
I want you to watch this whole tape, and it's going to be the entire WCW journey, and you can decide if you want to do it all over again. What would I say? In a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. You know, it's really interesting.
Eric Bischoff would do it all over again, though, if he had the chance.
I was hired by WCW. I didn't know what WCW was.
World Championship Wrestling.
I was an outsider to the business. I was a sales guy.
Getting hit with another advertisement.
Can save lives.
We'll mute during that. But yeah, Vince Russo was considered one of the greatest wrestling writers of all time for WWF. Pretty much responsible for all of the Attitude Era characters. And then once the Attitude Era kind of reached its end, around like 99, 2000, they fired Vince Russo because they felt like he wasn't doing a good job anymore with the writing. Vince Russo went over to the enemy. He joined the enemy, WCW, and like I said, he was really trying to fucking fix a horse with a broken leg.
Through a good friend of mine, Sonny Ono, this little thing called Ninja Star Wars came into my life. You put these vests on, and you put one on, I put one on, we chase each other around the house, and if I hit you with 3 of my stars, you're out. Just like laser tag, only with these little stars. Then it was like, all right, how do we sell them? At the time, the AWA was on Monday through Friday, and the AWA was Vern's business.
Vern Gagne, thanks for being out here.
Well, my pleasure, and I'm glad I got out here. Vern Gagne, professional athlete, wrestler, promoter.
Don't you dare miss it.
Vern did it all.
Vern Gagne's Pro Wrestling Report. Here's how to order. Mail $14.95.
I thought, I'm going to call Vern Gagne. If Vern runs the commercial in his wrestling program that's seen nationwide, we'll split 50-50. I took one of the games and went to meet Vern. I thought I was going to get the deal, right, that I was looking for, which I did, but I was also offered a job.
Welcome to AWA Championship Wrestling.
So my job was to travel around the Midwest and talk independent television stations and be carrying AWA shows. It's a sales job. Sales is sales.
And I think we're going to erase any doubt you've ever had.
Also, a little bit of a pro wrestling history lesson for all of you. Most of the notorious bookers and promoters, such as a Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff, Paul Heyman for ECW, all started their careers basically under the mentorship for other promotions. They all started working at other promotions. Eric Bischoff right here talking about before he even became a promoter, worked for AWA. Paul Heyman, before he became the leader for ECW, he worked for WCW. Vince McMahon, before he even became, the leader of the WWE, he learned it all from his father. If it wasn't for Vince McMahon learning from his father, we probably wouldn't even have a WWE today, because he all learned how to do it from his dad.
Any doubt you've ever had.
I had never met anybody like Eric. If he thought something was a really good idea, then he would start to take action, to breathe life into it.
I'd always been curious how television works. At night, I just sat in and learned. And then eventually I was on camera.
My name is Eric Bischoff, and you heard...
All this took place over the course of about a year and a half or 2 years while I was in AWA.
Buckle up real tight because you're going for a hard, bumpy ride, I promise.
The last 6 or 8 months of it, I didn't get paid. He couldn't afford to pay me. My wife and I and our kids suffered financially.
Now we have 2 little ones, and we are literally bouncing checks to buy diapers and barely making rent.
That's how bad it was.
The world heavyweight champion. He is the living legend, Larry Zbyszko.
Larry Zbyszko had worked with me in AWA. We had become friends. He left AWA, was working in WCW. Larry told me that, hey, they're looking for announcers down here. And within days, I got a call.
See you next time.
I got to WCW, man. I was the happiest third-string announcer that had ever put on a pair of shoes.
So basically what Eric Bischoff is saying here, did a little bit of time in AWA, being like an interviewer, just working, backstage, getting his feet wet. And then WCW got to a point where they basically needed new commentators. And that opened up a job opportunity for Eric Bischoff to become a commentator for WCW.
I came into WCW so wide-eyed because I was working for Turner Broadcasting.
He was very nice. He was just seemed like he was not a fish out of water, but he was kind of uncomfortable, is the way it seemed to start with.
He's got a suit on, and he's got, perfect black hair. He looks like a Ken doll.
I'm here with Sam Dallas.
The talent within WCW, unbelievable. There was Dusty Rhodes and Gordon Soley and Kevin Sullivan and certainly Ric Flair. And there was a new generation, guys like Sting.
So at the start of WCW's existence, really the big stars for WCW at that time, when Eric Bischoff was first starting to become involved with the company, they really only had guys like Dusty Rhodes, because Vince McMahon fucking hated Dusty Rhodes. They had Ric Flair. They also had a young Sting in development, who later on would become one of their biggest stars.
Diamond Dallas Page. Scott Hall was the Diamond Stud.
On 3, 1, 2, 3, rip it off!
Scott was working in WCW when I was hired. So was Kevin Nash. Good-looking guy, great physique.
Yeah. Poor Kevin Nash has so many different characters in the beginning. They didn't know what to do with him.
I just shot Ninja Turtles. And then I believe Dusty took acid. And he said, Baby, you gonna be ours. I said,
So basically, a lot of wrestlers got some time to work in WCW. Most of them didn't really get over at first because, again, the gimmicks and the characters were so fucking bad. Kevin Nash was talking about his experience here when he first started with the company. He had to jump around from character to character. They did not have one set thing for the guy. They didn't even know what the fuck they wanted to do with Kevin Nash. And now he's talking about basically being a star Shredder in the Ninja Turtles movie. If you guys have ever seen it, I've seen it. Kevin Nash has done a lot of Hollywood roles because around this time, he really wasn't making any money from pro wrestling. He really wasn't a star yet, and he didn't have the NWO to grasp onto or anything. So it was really either try to play these bullshit characters or go to Hollywood and make movies and probably make some better money than what he was making in WCW.
you do realize that the movie is called The Wizard of Oz. You can be the wizard, but you can't be Oz. Oz is the geographical region. No, baby, you can be Oz. I'm just saying. All right?
World Championship Wrestling is bringing it to you, baby. We're taking a look at Oz.
I just show up in this lime green outfit and an old man's rubber mask, and then they wrestle a geographical region.
Look at this move right here.
They were trying to put a round peg in a square hole.
They tried to do the gimmicks.
Looks like something's going on down here.
They would bring, RoboCop.
Ooh, what strength for RoboCop?
But they really didn't work.
It didn't work.
It was an absolute shit show.
He's getting cooked, and I think he's well done, guys. The crowd here going crazy.
WCW had a loyal following.
The theater executives regarded the WCW audience as being downscale.
It was downscale, very sort of Southern and Midwestern. I didn't care about it. I wasn't a fan of it.
80% of the people who worked at Turner weren't really wrestling fans to start with.
So basically, a lot of the audience for WCW at the start, a majority of them were Southern wrestling fans. They were country wrestling fans, right? They did not appeal to an audience like WWF got their start in New York. Really, Vince McMahon tried to really make New York his foundation. So obviously more of an Eastern audience, more of a primetime audience. He wanted deals with like things like USA Network, Turner Broadcast, things like TBS, TNT. They had wrestling on their shows, but they didn't fucking care about wrestling. Probably most of them never even fucking watched an episode a day in their life, but it was still something that they were paying for their people to watch.
Ted Turner wears many hats for his many colorful careers. He is the owner of the baseball Atlanta Braves, the basketball Atlanta Hawks.
So, of course, one of the big territories for WCW, Atlanta, right? Georgia, a southern state. That was the enemy of WWF. New York, an eastern state.
Pioneered television with his own cable network, which broadcasts 24 hours of news. Playboy magazine called him a bona fide, larger-than-life character.
Captain Outrageous, that was one of his nicknames.
He will say anything he wants to, anytime he wants to.
You said network presidents should be lined up and shot.
My kind of guy.
Ted enjoyed the fact that I know that you don't like my wrestling, and that's exactly why I like it.
And that's pretty much exactly what it was to Ted Turner. It was wrestling. It was the Southern slang. It was only supposed to be an entertainment value. He never seen it as this fucking big future or this thing that essentially a WWE would become, where now, I mean, they could fucking sell out a show in India if they wanted, right?
Had bought a little TV station here in Atlanta, and he built an international broadcasting empire in a few years. And wrestling was one of those things that helped build TBS and the entire network.
Another advertisement happening here. But yeah, that's just pretty much some of the backstory for the early days. It was really WCW dominating more of the southern states, and being more of an entertainment value for the Southern and the country wrestling fans. And then over here, more in the big cities like New York, it was more of a WWF dominated game, right? Vince McMahon knew how to market to a little bit of a wider audience.
Wrestling was there. It was a lifeblood of programming for local television stations.
It could command a loyal audience in the millions of viewers.
So Ted believed in the power and the loyalty and the size of the professional wrestling audience. Ted launched WCW as a result of purchasing Jim Crockett Promotions, which was a Southern wrestling company.
Jesus Christ!
WCW was seen as sort of the long-suffering, distant number two, trailing behind the WWF.
Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. They left. They go to the WWF. Scott Hall becomes Razor Ramon. He becomes a big star. Kevin Nash becomes Diesel. Boom, big star.
From the standpoint of the talent, we always consider WWE the show.
And even right there, I mean,
from a production value,
guys. And even right there, I mean, you know, you can even see like a little bit of foreshadowing in the early days. This is still 93 era here in WCW. And like Eric Bischoff just said, they had Kevin Nash, they had Scott Hall. What happened? They fucking left. They wanted better opportunities in the WWF. They go to WWF, start working with Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon turns them into Razor Ramon, Diesel, and both of them became WWE champions in their own right. Diesel, former WWF champion. Razor Ramon, former Intercontinental champion. Had some of the best matches at WrestleMania with Shawn Michaels.
Perspective, from a talent roster perspective, from a marketing perspective, from a financial perspective, WCW lost millions of dollars every year.
I've been warned by my boss that don't help WCW. Why? If I help them make money? No, you don't understand. Executive management hates wrestling and wants to get rid of it. And if you're perceived as trying to help them, that's career suicide for you.
Other than Ted Turner, there was not an executive in Turner Broadcasting that wanted WCW to be in the Turner portfolio.
Put yourself in the position of a television executive within that corporation. You have this division that is losing as much as $10 million on a yearly basis, and we don't really get the appeal of this entire genre to begin with. So of course that was going to create a lot of resentment and confusion as to why do we even have this on the airwaves.
Mixed Bad Blood Ball 2.
That's what really set the conditions for this dysfunctional relationship between TBS and WCW.
Bill Shaw was the Vice President of Human Resources for Turner Broadcasting. He was given responsibility to take over WCW as the effective president of it. So Bill came in, he said, Ted Turner has made a decision that this company is going to either turn a profit or Ted's going to pull the plug. Ted had made up his mind that enough was enough, and he was going to give WCW one last shot. And we're going to hire an executive producer who is going to take WCW from a wrestling company to a television property.
Wrestling was seen by the wrestling people as an arena business. The only other person besides Ted that saw it as television was Eric.
So I threw my name in a hat.
So essentially, what's happening right now in 93, Ted Turner is seeing a loss in profit. He's not making the desired amount of money that he wishes. And he basically makes the decision to hire a new president, a new leader for WCW. Eric Bischoff felt like he was right for the job. So he applied, and the rest is history.
A month or so later, I'm the executive producer.
This is your chance to be a part of professional wrestling history.
What the hell am I going to do?
From executive producers Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Danny Garcia, and the creators of Dark Side of the Ring.
The legacy of WCW is iconic.
WCW was on top.
Egos, egos, egos.
Then it burned to the ground. Betrayal.
I have my suspicions.
Greed.
It was like a pool of sharks.
Disaster.
You want to hear the real story, or you want to hear the bull story?
Who killed WCW? Tuesdays at 10. on Vice.
Okay, so it does seem like it's going to be a series. New episodes every Tuesday.
You come down with a hand of the heat, and don't forget that, sucker! The way my brother and I came into WCW was a good old boy system gimmick, for two black guys.
This is a spectacular team!
But you could tell the difference going from the good old boys era to the Eric Bischoff era, just by the way he tried to create something. I was hired as an executive producer. My responsibility was solely the look and feel of the show.
Saturday night.
The biggest challenge that we had was the fact that we couldn't attract an audience. It looked horrible because you had to turn the lights down to hide the fact that nobody was there. How do we fix that? That's
essentially the same kind of thing is happening today in All Elite Wrestling, where now they just have to fill out smaller venues, right? So instead of fucking selling out a Madison Square Garden, they could be performing down at the fucking local high school gym, and now you have to black out half of the arena because half of it's empty, right? The seats that aren't filled, that shows on television, and that shows that you're not putting on a good product. That shows that people also aren't buying into the product. So now essentially what's happened to All Elite Wrestling is they went from things like a fucking Madison Square Garden, which right now WWE could sell that out in a heartbeat, right? I mean, if they went there tomorrow, would most likely be a packed house, considering who they have on the show, right? Booked on the card. And, AEW struggles to even just pack half of that. They can't even fill up the high school fucking gyms, like I said. So essentially the same thing happening here in WCW in its early stages, where a lot of the arenas are blacked out and they're only showing maybe like that bottom, the 100 section or the floor section, the seats that are actually filled, because those are the only fucking tickets that were bought.
When I decided I was going to shoot the shows down at the Disney MGM studios, they had sound stages so I could control the look of the environment.
Eric Bischoff also, I think, one of the smartest things, obviously, Eric Bischoff did in terms of a production standpoint, as he's saying now, he moved WCW specifically to production stages around Disney and around Florida, so that way they could film wrestling there, and that tremendously helped the production, because at the time, WWF, they were still early, right? They didn't have the production that they have today compared to fucking, Hunter Hearst Helmsley and fucking Stephanie McMahon. Their production is like fucking $1 million to $1 billion, right? But at this time, really some of the highest production you could get is on those Disney movie studio sets. So Eric Bischoff had the idea to take that kind of production and help advance WCW.
And I had a fresh audience coming through 5 times a day, so I could shoot 5 or 6 shows with a fresh audience each and every time. Spin 'em up, lights, camera, action.
I think Eric Bischoff really wanted to take WCW away from being a Southern wrestling company.
You could see the difference. You could feel it. In '94, I ascended from executive producer to vice president, and at that time, nobody thought WCW would ever be competitive with WWE.
So in 1994, Eric Bischoff switches from a producer to now a full-time president for WCW. 1994. Now his intention, his goal is to strictly compete with the WWF, to make wrestling fun for his audience.
I needed people to take WCW seriously. I needed Hulk Hogan.
I don't think we'd be here if there was no Hulk Hogan.
In the 1980s, Hulk Hogan is the patriotic, ultra good guy. He's coming out waving an American flag, fighting off these evil foreigners.
He was the one who broke professional wrestling wide open.
Commercials, cartoons, kids loved him. Everybody knew Hulk Hogan.
Whether you're a professional wrestling fan or not, you knew the name. Eating your vitamins, saying your prayers. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins.
Ric Flair's the greatest wrestler of all time. But the guy that was on Sports Illustrated, he's the guy.
Coincidentally, while we were shooting WCW at the Disney MGM Studios, Hulk Hogan was down at Disney shooting a new series called Thunder in Paradise.
So a little bit of a side note on this as well. Obviously, during the 80s and the 90s, the biggest wrestling star, if not one of the biggest, was Hulk Hogan, right? Leader for pro wrestling, signed to WWF and Vince McMahon. Once he kind of got tired of Vince McMahon not really working along with him, Hulk Hogan also decided, well, maybe I should take my talents to Hollywood. Maybe I should start doing movies. Coincidentally enough, around 94, when Eric Bischoff is at the Disney Hollywood Studios, so is Hulk Hogan. Now, Hulk Hogan is still a WWF guy. He's still technically signed with Vince McMahon. But Eric Bischoff needs somebody to lead WCW to the next step. And Eric Bischoff and Ted Turner had more money to put in Hulk Hogan's pocket than Vince McMahon was at the time. And that is really what interested Hulk Hogan. The money was right, the dollars were there, and that is why he switched teams.
Now, Hulk had been out of wrestling for some time because of the steroid trial.
He's like a good role model because he just like did whatever it took to get big. Like he took those steroid pills.
And I thought, why not at least try to get a meeting? But he didn't know who I was. So I went to Ric Flair. Hello. I said, Rick, do you think you can set up a call or meeting between Hulk and I? One night I was sound asleep.
Now, obviously, in 1994, Hulk Hogan doesn't have a fucking idea who Eric Bischoff even is, but Ric Flair does know who Eric Bischoff is. Ric Flair works for WCW, and would you believe it or not, Ric Flair is pretty close friends with another big wrestler in the business, Hulk Hogan.
The phone rings and I picked up the phone. It's, hey, brother. Whoa! Wake up. It was Hulk.
Welcome, Hulk Hogan!
Being able to work with Hulk Hogan, being on the same roster as Hulk Hogan, elevated everybody's career, and it had immediate impact. All of a sudden, people were returning phone calls much faster. It's all perception.
That's why we're here today, for a match between two of wrestling's biggest superstars, Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair.
So Hulk's original deal included 4 pay-per-views a year, and he had creative control.
The original deal for Hulk Hogan was 4 pay-per-views in 1 year, and he would have creative control. That was his original WCW deal. The second he put his fucking name on the dotted line, he had creative control.
So it means that he gets a thumbs up or thumbs down as to whether or not he wants to do it.
WCW is about to dominate the globe in professional wrestling.
Talent began to get a little confident that this Turner guy over here is starting to get serious.
Dad always loves competition. So you get a Vince McMahon who says, oh, this is my territory. There's going to be problems.
Upsets. So now we're shifting into the year 1995. So just a little bit of an overview of what happened in 94. WCW finally acquires Hulk Hogan. And that just skyrockets the company to the next level, right? Because it's pretty much like the LeBron James effect. Once LeBron James is playing for the team, other people want to come and play for the team.
Keep in mind,
now the year is 95.
We had a one-on-one meeting with Ted Turner. And I walked into the meeting, my boss, Harvey Short, was already sitting there. Scott Sassa, the heir apparent to Ted Turner at the time. He was in the room. So I sat down and immediately, Eric, let me ask you a question. I can't do a good Ted Turner impersonation. Oh, Eric, what's it going to take?
And even, I will just say this, through like 94, 95, 96, all the way up practically until like 97, that was like the years where WCW really dominated the WWF. They had a very good run, but it did not last forever because once the Attitude Era kicked in, that is when they really had to start competing. And again, I mean, they had Hogan since like, what, 94? and then you fast forward maybe 6-7 years later, the NWO is still getting put over all of the fucking future potential stars in WCW, all because of what? Hulk Hogan did have creative control. If Hulk Hogan doesn't want you to fucking win the match, if Hulk Hogan doesn't want you to beat Hulk Hogan, you ain't gonna fucking beat Hulk Hogan. And those were the WCW rules.
WCW to be competitive with WWE. In what seemed like 20 minutes, it was maybe milliseconds, but it was like watching your life pass before you right before the train hits you. I don't know what the answer is. What are my options? You can't bullshit Ted Turner. He'll see through that so fast. Tell the truth. Truth usually works. So I'm just going to tell him the truth. So I said, Ted, they're on prime time. Monday night. Coast.
WWF at this time in 95 already had primetime slot. Like I said, WWF built up a beautiful relationship with New York City, started basically building their foundation there. USA caught hold of them, started to do contracts with Vince McMahon. USA still shows Monday Night Raw to this very day. The only time I've ever seen it change is when WWE did the Monday Night deal with Spike. And now Spike TV no longer exists, unfortunately. I loved Spike TV back in the day. That's the only other time I've seen Vince McMahon and the WWE not work with USA Network, because USA Network helped propel them to that primetime position.
East Coast. We're 6:05 Eastern, 3:05 Pacific on a Saturday. We can't be competitive with that.
Up to this point in 95, WCW would have their wrestling mainly on Saturdays. So WCW was known more as weekend wrestling as opposed to just being a primetime Monday Night Raw show, right?
Ted looks over to Scott Sass and says, oh, Scott, give her 2 hours every Monday night, head to head, WWE. I thought.
So Eric Bischoff, he basically says to Ted Turner, we need a different time slot. We can't be on the weekends anymore. Eric Bischoff has now found some great production at the Disney Studios in Hollywood. Or not Hollywood, but basically like down in Florida. Hollywood production, if you will. But now in 95, he needs something to put them in a better time slot.
How am I going to do this? And I walked out of Ted's office, locked myself in my room, sat there with a yellow legal pad and said, start thinking of ways.
So at this time, Monday Night Raw was the primary show for the WWF, and the WWF was, at that time, the first company to have that primetime show on Mondays.
Vince McMahon struck gold, as you just heard, one of the very first wrestling shows to ever have a primetime slot, and it's all thanks to Vince McMahon and his business decisions. So he had that primetime slot even way before fucking WCW.
When Ted said, I want to move WCW to TNT, it was like, what are you kidding me? I've been killing myself to build this brand that we were known as the premium network on basic cable. When I tried to fight Ted on it, I lost that battle.
How can I be better than the WWF? I can't. Their production value was much better. The storytelling, it was cleaner, easy to follow, and built everything to feel larger than life. WCW always looked like it was trying to catch up to the wheel that just fell off. But if I can give people a reason to watch me instead of them, I got a shot. The one vulnerability was that they were taped every other week. We should be live. I went to Brad Siegel and said, I want to do this live every week.
We were so competitive with USA Network. If we go...
So there you have it. One of the first big decisions that Eric Bischoff realized he could do for WCW. Even though WWF and Monday Night Raw had their primetime slot on the USA Network, it was pre-recorded. Monday Night Raw was not live. It was all filmed beforehand and then aired on television. Eric Bischoff wanted wrestling to be live. He wanted it to have live reactions captured at that moment. You get to watch it from your house. Eric Bischoff is responsible for probably mostly all of wrestling today being live.
Up against them, we're going to hurt the highest rated show, Raw, on Monday night. It would be the way that we can win as the #1 basic cable network.
He said, we've got a block of action programming called Nitro. Why don't we thematically keep it the same? We'll call the show Nitro. Hell yeah. WCW Monday Nitro. But we could not give tickets away. Keep in mind, this is the first Nitro. Nobody's ever heard of it before. Well, if I can't put it in an arena where it's going to look cool, what about Mall of America? Mall of America at the time was like a big damn deal.
The bargains are coming! The bargains are coming!
Back then, Mall of America was kind of a destination. Still, the largest mall in the United States.
Just about big enough to hold WCW and its debut broadcast of Monday Nitro.
My hope was that I'd get enough people that were walking by the mall that would stop long enough and watch that I could get kind of a couple beauty shots, and it worked great.
So, Eric Bischoff gets his request. Ted Turner grants him the show, Nitro, which basically becomes Monday Night Nitro. But the very first episode, nobody was going to buy tickets. Nobody would have sold out the arena because nobody fucking even knew who Eric Bischoff was. And WCW Nitro was still very early in its development. So even though Eric Bischoff had the production, even though he had the money, his idea was, well, if I'm not going to sell tickets for the first show, I'm going to take it directly to the people and they can decide if they want to watch it. So he puts on an entire wrestling show inside Mall of America, and everybody gets to watch it for free, basically. The people who are going to watch it are the fans, right? Those are the ones who buy into the product. Anybody in that mall could be fucking anybody, but people who are interested are going to stay and watch.
Like a really cool fight club for yuppies. If you want surprises, this is where you come, because our show is live and you never know who's going to show up. Lex Luger. Everybody thought that Lex was under contract.
And that also was one of the very big first additions for WCW, was the addition of Lex Luger. Buffalo, New York's very own. If anybody doesn't know, Lex Luger is a Buffalo native. He was originally going to be the next Hulk Hogan for Vince McMahon, but in WWF, people didn't buy into that gimmick. People seen Lex Luger as a talent. They knew he had potential, but they didn't see him as the next Hulk Hogan. And that is basically what WWF wanted him to be. That is what they molded him to be, was the next Hulk Hogan, the next replacement for Hulk Hogan after he left the fucking WCW. But what happens to Lex Luger in WWF? The fans don't like that gimmick. They don't want Lex Luger to be the next Hulk Hogan. Lex Luger's career in WWF, instead of going fucking up, is now going down. And that gives him an opportunity to join WCW. So Buffalo, New York's very own legend, Lex Luger, becomes a WCW guy almost right off the fucking bat.
It's been WWE the night before.
WWE had no idea. And that set the tone for Nitro.
When I came there, Eric was testing the waters.
I am Medusa.
I was WWF's champion. I'm like, I got an idea.
And that's what I think of the WWF Women's Championship.
One of the biggest traders during this time as well, Medusa, also known to the wrestling community as Alundra Blaze. All during this time, Medusa was the current WWF Women's Champion. She did not like the way she was being handled in WWF by Vince McMahon and the bookers. So she gets the offer from Eric Bischoff in WCW. Come over to our show, sign a contract. Alundra Blaze is pretty interested. But instead of leaving her contract with WWF, she shows up live on a Monday Nitro episode with the Women's Championship and fucking trashes it to say WWF is below us. here in WCW. That was one of the shots heard around the world. It fucking slapped Vince McMahon right in the face, right? I mean, there's his current women's champion on another wrestling promotion disrespecting his championship.
That shock value is what we really needed to get the attention.
That's the magic of live. That's what will make us competitive.
One of the different aspects too during this time, WWF had a women's division and the WCW did not, right? The WCW kind of wanted more of like cheerleaders, almost, it seemed like, for the lovely ladies, unfortunately. So they treated more of the ladies like cheerleaders instead of actually having matches. WWF did have a women's division, but it wasn't as stacked as it is today. And you can even see down the line, Vince McMahon, how he treated his women's division, right? The one thing that did separate the WCW from WWF, they implemented more cruiserweights. So WCW would extend their hand to other foreign promotions. They would sign wrestlers from Mexico. They would sign wrestlers from Japan to bring in more of a cruiserweight element to their show, which is something WWF did not even fucking do. When you want to think about championships, the WWF had a women's championship and an intercontinental championship, and WCW had cruiserweight championship and a United States championship. If it wasn't for the loss of WCW, WWE would probably not have a United States championship or a cruiserweight championship.
I'm focused on that big nasty giant, but the main thing, like you said, Mean Gene, is to get in that ring, brother. Take the WCW.
In this country, we love to build people up. We love to tear them down. And then we love them to rise from the ashes again.
We weren't seeing the gains in terms of ratings that we had anticipated. We had kind of leveled out. Hulk could sense, I think, that the Hulk Hogan character, it was losing steam.
They are taking him apart.
The audience still reacted to it.
So around 95, Hulk Hogan, still one of the biggest stars in pro wrestling, but he's starting to lose his cool. And this is kind of what starts Eric Bischoff to think about, well, what is the next thing for WCW? We need to keep Hulk Hogan alive. He's still popular with the audience. And that's what starts basically the Hollywood gimmick for Hulk Hogan and basically shifts the company into the NWO direction.
But not the same way.
I saw the hair boost.
Hulk Hogan making his way to the ring.
The 80s were done.
I needed to change the perception of Hulk Hogan forever.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW.
So in the 80s and the early 90s, Hulk Hogan is pretty much the star of professional wrestling, right? And Eric Bischoff's great idea was to take the biggest hero and turn him into the biggest villain. And that is the birth of Hollywood Hulk Hogan. The fans were growing tired of Hulk Hogan and the fucking smiles and laughs gimmick, right? Always playing good guy. Even if he was going to lose the match, he would still be the good guy. The fans in WCW, they didn't want to see that anymore. And again, you have to compete with the WWF product.
Dwayne The Rock Johnson and Danny Garcia, and the creators of Dark Side of the Ring.
We paid the price to be the best.
The legacy of WCW is iconic. When it went out of business, it was the end of that era.
WCW was on top.
A company that grows to become the phoenix of professional wrestling.
Then it burned to the ground.
Egos, egos, egos.
Betrayal.
I have my suspicions.
Greed.
It's like a pool of sharks.
Disaster.
I was invading their world.
You're going to hell just for that.
Stand by.
He made it not advertiser friendly.
A 4-part must-see event.
Idiots everywhere. It's just mind-boggling.
I don't believe in the number of coincidences that surround this entire situation. That's always going to be the million-dollar question.
Who killed WCW?
You want to hear the real story, or you want to hear the bull story?
Tuesdays at 10 on Vice.
So the year now is 1996.
May 27th of 1996, Scott Hall debuted on WCW television.
You people, you know who I am.
Scott Hall.
So the year is already 1996. Hulk Hogan, he's kind of growing out with the company. The fans are getting a little tired of seeing him. But around 1996, there is another shift for the WCW. They once again acquire Scott Hall. They once again acquire Kevin Nash. And that is the basic formation of the NWO. It's basically all of the once upon a time biggest stars in WWF now coming over to the other team.
Worked and performed for WWF as Razor Ramon.
But you don't know why I'm here.
Kevin Nash shows up.
Everybody knew they were WWF guys.
Oh my God, no, turn over now. Razor Ramon and Diesel are on Nitro. Are they the WWF?
You want a war? We are taking over.
They were bad guys that were like invading the company.
This is different. This is something that we have never seen in professional wrestling. By not dissuading people, that's what created the perception that perhaps this was an invasion.
And of course, the year is 96. There is basically no fucking internet. There's basically no fucking social media. You can't just find out from whoever and whenever the fuck you want of what the hell is going on. You actually have to be a wrestling fan, and you actually have to be watching this to experience it. During this time, this all seemed like a fucking invasion, right? Because here are these WWF guys. Maybe like a week ago or even just yesterday, you seen them on fucking Vince McMahon's show, and now here they are on the Enemy show. And people know it's the Enemy show. People know that WCW is the direct competition to the WWF. So why would these guys be switching over teams? It all created questions. It all created the hype that is now today known as the Attitude Era.
But of course it wasn't. They didn't want to renew their contract with WWE.
Scott Hall and Kevin Nash did not want to renew contracts with the WWF.
I'm thinking, I need a reality storyline. Admittedly now, enough time has gone by. I admittedly allowed them to think that they were showing up on behalf of WWE.
Do you work for the WWF? No.
And then they alluded to a third man.
You tell Billionaire Ted to break out the money and get anybody you can, because the big man and the medium-sized man and our surprise buddy are gonna carve them up.
Big surprise coming in. Who's the third man? All while that's going on television, Hulk Hogan's in California doing a movie called Santa with Muscles.
Keep the milk and cookies warm.
Classic.
Hulk Hogan's doing Santa with Muscles in Hollywood.
Anyway, I can get you to come out
filming
and talk
movies.
to you about creative. Got to his trailer. He's waiting for me. He says, brother, who's the third man?
Eric Bischoff needs him for the NWO.
I already spent 2 weeks convincing Sting to turn heel and be the third man.
And right there, Eric Bischoff even said he spent weeks on end trying to convince Sting to become a villain. He originally wanted Sting as the third member in the NWO over Hulk Hogan. Sting didn't want to be a bad guy. Sting felt like his career would be better off as a good guy, as the hero, which in reality, it played out as a smarter decision because Sting is mostly known as a good guy still to this day.
I didn't want to tell him, but I didn't want to lie to him either. Who do you think it should be? You're looking at him, brother. Oh, wow.
World Championship Wrestling presents the best and the beast.
I didn't want him to come to the building until the very last minute. I talked to Kevin Sullivan about the best way to try to achieve that. Kevin Sullivan sequestered Hall in Daytona Beach.
He had to babysit him for like a whole night because he was afraid that Hogan might not show up as a mystery third man.
There were a lot of risks to Hulk turning heel. You have to put yourself in his shoes.
Hulk is a very loyal guy, and he was carrying a lot of people. If he lost his endorsements, if he lost movies, maybe their pocketbook would be hurt.
Now, just to think about what they're saying here, they're saying they are pretty hesitant at first to turn Hulk Hogan into a villain. The original idea, I think, for Sting was because Sting wasn't built up the same way as a Hulk Hogan, right? Didn't have the same notoriety as he would, like Hulk Hogan did in WWF. But at this time, Hulk Hogan was he was a babyface. He was the face of Hollywood too. He's over there making movies. Now, if you turn him into a villain, people are going to see him as a villain. Does that take a hit on his movies? Do people not want to come and see the movies now because Hulk Hogan's a fucking bad guy and all they've known for the past years on end is him being the pretty much face of America and pro wrestling? So it was a little bit hesitant too for them to turn Hulk Hogan into a villain, but it was Hulk Hogan's idea to become a villain.
I knew that there was a chance with people around Hulk, he could possibly second guess himself.
We don't know yet who the third man is.
We didn't leave my house till the first match started. I didn't want anybody to get to him.
Hulk shows up at the building. I still don't know at this point where his head is at, because we hadn't talked all day.
Lex Luger, the Macho Man, Randy Savage, and Sting will represent WCW to meet these outsiders.
When Hogan came down the ramp, I still wasn't 100% sure.
Hulk Hogan is here! Hulk Hogan's here!
So Hulk Hogan shows up at this event as it is Team WCW versus the Outsiders. The third man still not announced for Team NWO. But now here comes Hulk Hogan. In his traditional red and yellow gimmick, he's playing the babyface, but this is going to be known as one of the biggest turns in pro wrestling history, the second he becomes a villain.
Comes down, we clear out, he hits the rope, drops the leg.
Is he the third man? He's the third man!
The production truck erupted with elation for what just went down and how the crowd reacted to it. It was a roar like we hadn't heard before.
And it got louder and angrier, and it was building.
They were pissed. Really pissed.
What do we got here? We got a fan coming in.
He's a hero. And now the hero's standing in the middle of the ring that was filling up with garbage, telling every one of those fans he was only in it for the money.
It would be like Babe Ruth telling all the fans who had followed him for years and years and years to stick their support right up their ass.
All of this crap in the ring represents these fans out here.
It was the biggest turn in the history of wrestling. Saved his career.
Still to this day, ladies and gentlemen, Hulk Hogan turning into a villain is considered one of the biggest turns. They've been trying to do it multiple times afterwards, right? They tried to do it with Stone Cold, didn't fucking work out at all. And there was rumors that they were going to have John Cena do it, but here's the thing that some of these fucking new wrestling fans don't understand. People hated John Cena just for John Cena being John Cena. John Cena didn't have to fucking ever turn into a villain. John Cena is okay being a babyface because people hated John Cena just for him being a hero. So that is why John Cena never had to turn into a villain, because people already hated him.
And then it becomes the three guys with Hulk. Now it's like, who are they?
You can call this the new
Heroes come in all six.
And there is another advertisement. So right there, as soon as Hulk Hogan turns into a villain, that is essentially the birth of the new world order.
I didn't know what the NWO was about to become.
NWO, take one.
NWO is the thing that really broke everything. What was happening in pop culture, they were representing it with their spin on it. It was like street.
We can't have them have any association with WCW whatsoever.
This is our show. We're doing it our way.
Those small elements, the way we shot the NWO interviews, we shot in black and white. Black and white. Why are you doing black and white? Trust me, black and white will be cool.
And again, things like that from a production standpoint, things that WWF was not doing at all. NWO would film their promo videos in black and white. Now, again, Eric Bischoff is saying this is, pretty much late 90s. Why would these guys be shooting promos in black and white? it added to the effect. It added to the gimmick of the NWO. NWO pretty much gets to the point where they become so popular in WCW, it becomes WCW versus NWO, which is something you've never even heard in the WWF.
Not only was it pretty cool, but also disruptive. And those guys were the right talent to pull it off. They did whatever the they wanted to do. Didn't care whether you cheered them or you booed them. Zero to give. Those guys really set the world on fire.
My son came home from school and asked me if I could bring him 4 or 5 NWO shirts so he could take them to school the next day. And I said, why? He said, all my friends want them. Well, absolutely. That's what we began to see emerging with Eric's vision of what the NWO was. They were bad, but they were cool.
To this day, there's still NWO shirts.
They became anti-heroes, even though they were booked as the villains, even though they were pretty much the villain team on WCW. People fucking loved them.
And when something gets too big too fast,
I mean, it was one of the most popular things to happen to pro wrestling in all of its history.
There's a control room now. Hold on, what do we got here? What's that do? What's that? Oh! Fade to black. Shouldn't have bought that cheap TV.
From executive producers Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Danny.
Which again, to me, is really why people have to be careful nowadays with who they turn into villains and who they turn into baby faces. Some people can strictly just play the hero. Some people can strictly just play the villain. Right? When you start to mess around with that, some bad things can happen. And WWE had to learn from that lesson when they tried to do it with Stone Cold. People did not want Stone Cold Steve Austin to turn into a heel gimmick. He was just fine being the anti-hero and going against Vince McMahon. But when Stone Cold turned and became a villain, that was also a downfall to the Attitude Era. That is what people in wrestling history consider the downfall of the Attitude Era, because Stone Cold was no longer the person that they knew. And this is exactly why I try to explain it to people as well. The same scenario can be said for John Cena. John Cena doesn't need to fucking be a villain. John Cena is fine just being himself because he can go out there and people will boo him just because he's the hero. So he never needed to switch into a villain.
Garcia and the creators of Dark Side of the Ring.
The legacy of WCW is iconic.
WCW was on top.
Egos, egos, egos.
Then it burned to the ground. Betrayal.
I have my suspicions.
Greed.
Like a pool of sharks.
Disaster.
You want to hear the real story or you want to hear the bull story?
Who killed WCW? Tuesdays at 10 on Vice.
You go back and you look at Nitro ratings from the premiere episode all the way up until the NWO was revealed. We were doing fine. We'd win a week or two. WWE would win a week or two. We were essentially even until the NWO. Legitimately, the NWO was responsible for 80% of our growth.
80% of WCW success came from NWO.
The reality, something that the audience can't tell whether it's real or whether it's not.
Worst thing you can do on earth in professional wrestling is have a backstage fight. Everybody that throws a punch backstage goes, ooh, it's so bad.
We want to make the back look completely real, not a wrestling program. Neil Pruitt came up with the idea of the production people helping. Up until that time, I never had gone to a producer and said, what kind of shot? But I went to him.
Conan up on middle turnbuckles, climbs the top. Nicely done.
There was that one night we were in Orlando at the Disney tapings.
We wanted to make it look like NWO just came and wreaked havoc and took over.
Somebody in the back! What is he talking about? Need somebody trying to get better, man.
We were inspired a bit by Hill Street Blues as far as the way you move throughout a scene with one camera. We were all about making it work, making what looked like reality happen.
Craig Douglas can hear us. Craig, are you going to send a cameraman back there or not?
So WCW now They want production to step up again, doing different camera work. Things like I said, they had the Disney Studios in Florida. So they could take Hollywood effects. They could do things that were being done in Hollywood movies right here on their set in a WCW fucking wrestling ring. They could make it look like you were watching a movie. And that's what they were going for. They wanted to be different from the WWF. And WWF didn't fucking look like a movie at the time. They didn't have Disney Studios to film on location.
They're coming around the corner.
Wait a minute, we go to the back.
And we had baseball bats.
They got baseball bats.
But all the carnage is already taking place. And it's the old Hitchcock. You see the knife, and then you see the blood. You let the mind create the violence.
They were picking up props. They were nailing it. They all worked their asses off to make it look as believable as they could.
And almost the same, the same ideology is being carried on today from a WWE perspective, right? They want their shit, they want their production to be top tier over everybody else. Right now, WWE has that production where they can make it look like a movie, thanks to all the years that, they've done what they've done, and they have the history behind them now. But, like I said, compare WWE production to an AEW production, it's fucking night and day, ladies and gentlemen. One of them is still a Turner broadcast, and the other just basically dominated fucking pro wrestling for like over the last decade.
And I don't know if it was planned in advance. Only Kevin Nash or Rey Mysterio could tell you that.
Nash picked up Rey Mysterio and threw him against the trailer like a lawn dart. Whap!
We're going to have Kevin Nash standing there, and they're going to have Rey Mysterio Jr. jump on him.
And there's Rey Mysterio. He's almost.
Ray says, do you think you can throw me through that window? No, dude. It's a window. You'll die. I said, let me just throw you off the trailer.
So we were doing things that nobody had ever seen.
It looked like a giant crime scene. Creates emotion in the audience. And they forget that they're watching professional wrestling.
We're going to try to get this all back together, and we'll be back.
WCW really started to leave their competition in the dust, and that was the vaunted 83-week winning streak.
We were pro wrestling, and they were playing catch-up for the first time.
I remember when that happened.
It's McMahon feeling the pressure.
We should do more shit like that. That freedom, we did not have. And to see the company not only compete with the WWE, but knock them on their ass for 83 weeks, like straight weeks. Wow.
Once those ratings started, there was no...
For 83 weeks straight, ladies and gentlemen, WCW dominated the WWF in rankings and ratings. So, for 83 straight weeks, Vince McMahon was under pressure. His show was considered the B show to NWO and WCW. Once again, because in WWF, people didn't like what they were seeing. It was growing old with them. It wasn't entertaining anymore. WWF needed to do something to compete with the NWO and WCW.
Stopping him. I think the war with WWF was personal with Eric.
He was always chasing ratings. Eric cared more about ratings than advertising dollars.
This is a television company, and we're going to run WCW like a television company.
It was this maniacal desire to be number one and to beat WWF.
There was a competitive pressure that I put on myself.
So Vince McMahon, this is for you.
And I said something like, I'm not going to stop till I drive a stake through the heart of Vince McMahon. I may have gone a little over the top.
Injured? Want to know what your case could really be?
It's a pretty good episode. I think the first in a series, so we will watch the next one as well when it airs. Pretty much probably on the next Thursday.
Dwayne The Rock Johnson and Danny Garcia, and the creators of Dark Side of the Ring.
Or fuck it, we might even watch it Tuesday, considering we're not going to be watching the next NXT. I'll still think about it for you, Chad.
when it went out of business. It was the end of that era.
WCW was on top.
A company that grows to become the phoenix of professional wrestling.
Then it burned to the ground.
Egos, egos, egos.
Betrayal.
I have my suspicions.
Greed.
It's like a pool of sharks.
Disaster.
I was invading their world.
You're going to hell just for that.
Stand by.
He made it not advertiser friendly.
A 4-part must-see event.
Idiots everywhere. It's just mind-boggling.
So there's going to be 4 parts, ladies and gentlemen. There's going to be 4 episodes in total.
This entire situation. That's always going to be the million-dollar question.
Who killed WCW?
You want to hear the real story or you want to hear the bull story?
Tuesdays at 10 on Vice.
Back up, 1996.
Still in the year 1996.
Plans his stuff out a year in advance. He knows what he's going to have in next year's WrestleMania 10 months.
The Attitude Era for WWF didn't even begin until the year I was born, in 97.
Before it happens. Why can't we do that? And I saw Sting as the opportunity to do that. One night, Scott Hall started explaining this idea that he had for a new version of the Sting character, based on the Brandon Lee character in the movie The Crow. And he goes,
So it was also the NWO's vision to turn Sting into more of that dark character where he would start to resemble more of the original Crow from the Brandon Lee movie. Rest in peace. But it was their idea to turn him into a little bit more of a darker character because, again, in this era of pro wrestling, people wanted shit to be based around reality. They wanted stuff to be darker. They wanted it to be more aggressive. And that is what forced WWF in 97 to become the Attitude Era. Didn't happen until the year I was born.
Scary Sting. And I looked over at Sting, and his eyes were like this big. The Sting Crow character was born.
That's Sting. It is.
So he went up in the rafters. It built the anticipation that was needed to really put that character over.
That started what became an 18-month story. And he started showing up and scaring the hell out of everybody in the NWO. Sting would finally confront Hogan. They'd have the match for control of WCW.
It was something really that had not been done to this degree before in the history of wrestling, which was making the decision that we're actually not going to pay this off next week or next month, but we're going to keep this going until the end of the year in our Starrcade pay-per-view.
Welcome to Starrcade 1997.
So for anybody who doesn't know, ladies and gentlemen, Starrcade was essentially WCW's version of a WrestleMania. Didn't get over as much as WrestleMania. They don't have as much great histories behind it. WrestleMania still to this day, I believe they're on like 40, 41, right? So you do the math. There wasn't that many fucking Starrcades.
18 months in the making.
Sting, he's going to beat Hogan clean. WCW is going to come out on top. Then it's going to be up to NWO to kind of rebuild from the ground up. That was the plan.
So the original plan at Starrcade 97, Sting versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Eric Bischoff's idea is to have Sting defeat Hulk Hogan so that way they can rebuild the NWO around that defeat.
Sting has returned to the wrestling ring to reclaim WCW's title from the NWO.
The original finish, it got convoluted and compromised throughout the day. There was supposed to be the big boot by Hogan, the leg drop on Sting, the cover.
It appears also Eric Bischoff is talking about how the finish for the match was never even determined. It must have happened on the fly, old school traditional wrestling, because fucking we can all see right here what the outcome is going to be.
But the referee's supposed to...
The winner of the match was Hollywood Hulk Hogan over Sting.
Do a fast count. It wasn't a fast count, but Bret Hart came in, restarted the match with himself as the referee.
Well, even the idea, the referee and the fast count and the whole thing, when they gave it to me, it was like, really? Like, that is the lamest ending.
Bret Hart is here tonight as a referee. Is that right? Is that correct?
It's an awful, stupid, and very convoluted ending for the match. But I remember Eric Bischoff insisting how it was going to be fantastic.
Bret Hart does not agree with the WCW writing.
And the crowd reacted the way you wanted them to react initially. Yay, Sting finally won.
So, of course, the original winner of the match was Hollywood Hulk Hogan. The match restarts because Bret Hart comes out after the fast count, and now he's the special referee. And now, after the match has restarted, the second winner is now Sting, NWO World Heavyweight Champion.
It wasn't until afterwards that people started to realize what a convoluted finish it was.
In our business, you can screw up the whole match. Do not up the finish.
Then all hell broke loose.
Back in the internet world, all of the purveyors of truth out there, they all of a sudden became so obsessed over the finish of Starrcade 97. What really happened between...
Some wrestling fans waited 15 months. They waited over an entire year to watch Sting defeat Hollywood Hulk Hogan and the NWO. And that was the finish that they got in the match. Once again, the terrible writing of WCW on display.
Sting and Hogan. Why did it happen? How did you let that happen? And I still get heat for that.
Bischoff had kind of hitched his wagon to Hogan. He kind of listened to what he said more than the other guys.
On the day of the Sting-Hogan match, it was apparent to both Hulk and I that Sting didn't appear to be nearly as excited about the opportunity that we've been working on for 18 months. There was something about him that day that was off. Sting left the room and Hulk and I kind of looked at each other and I said, "What are you thinking?" He goes, "Not today, brother. Not today. His head's not right." Hulk just wasn't feeling it. So we changed the finish, or lack thereof, of a clean finish, because Hulk Hogan has creative control.
He had creative control. He didn't give two shits. He'd walk in at 7:30, read the TV, and say, "Doesn't work for me, brother."
There you go. Don't work for me, brother. Don't work for me, brother.
He has no interest in that company other than himself. That right?
I need to buy a shirt that says "Doesn't work for me, brother."
There can really start turning things a certain way.
I think the only guy that was not political was Sting.
Sting didn't seem to be part of that group.
I think
Sting did not care about the politics. Sting did not care if he won or lost. He really just wanted to help WCW excel.
Been convinced that Hulk was going to pull the rug out from underneath him at the last minute. He walked into that meeting.
Sting was always loyal to the WCW until Vince McMahon bought his contract.
Expecting it and actually manifested it.
When guys got those kind of agendas, thinking about themselves, that's what happens. And that's...
Even when WCW was finally purchased by Vince McMahon, some of their biggest stars, such as Sting, still did not want to switch over to the WWF because Sting always felt like that was the enemy. Sting was loyal to the WCW. And even after WCW was purchased by Vince McMahon, Sting did not agree to compete for WWF at the time. Sting would go over to other promotions, such as a TNA. Obviously, in no correspondence to a WWF.
Pretty much when the ship started to go down.
Only a few minutes left in this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in with me. I think only like 10 or 12 minutes left in this first episode. They said a 4-part series, so this is the first episode out of these 4 parts. Looks like we only got about 5 minutes left, actually, so it'll definitely be coming to an end soon. I think it's a pretty interesting series, though.
I have my suspicions.
Greed.
Like the poor sharks.
Disaster.
You want to hear the real story, or you want to hear the bull?
Who killed WCW? Tuesdays at 10 on Vice.
Starrcade 97, Hogan and Sting is going to haunt me for the rest of my life. We had the audience in the palm of our hands, but unfortunately, the end didn't live up to the rest of the story, and certainly wasn't what the fans wanted. You'll find people who think
people did not get the ending that they wanted from WCW at Starrcade 97 with Sting versus Hogan. And now, of course, like I said, in 97, that is also the start of the WWF and the Attitude Era. So now, people hated the story writing in WCW. They hated the finish to a match that was basically built up over a year with Sting versus Hollywood Hogan. Didn't get the ending that they wanted. And now in 97 is the birth of WWF and the Attitude Era.
He established a strong creative foundation throughout 97. If you go back and look at the numbers, you can start to see that gap getting ever closer.
Vince McMahon went on camera and said, we're going to change the way we do things. We're not going to insult the audience's intelligence.
The World Wrestling Federation has been an entertainment mainstay here in North America and all over the world. As the times have changed, so have we. I'm happy to say that this new, vibrant, creative direction has resulted in a huge increase in television viewership.
He's saying, we're going to do what those other guys are doing because it's really kicking our ass and it's beginning to hurt.
That brings Mike Tyson into wrestling.
Now, Vince McMahon and the Attitude Era, as much as they had to compete with the NWO and WCW, I actually feel like more of the Attitude Era was actually inspired from Paul Heyman and ECW, right, with their violence and hardcore wrestling. They were also doing some groundbreaking things in pro wrestling. Unfortunately, Paul Heyman never had the exact same bank account as a Vince McMahon or an Eric Bischoff. So you can kind of see why ECW didn't get to the same level of success. But it is rumored that a lot of the inspiration behind the Attitude Era came from the hardcore wrestling in ECW. ECW even worked hand in hand with WWF in some episodes. At the start of the Attitude Era, ECW and their roster would be featured on WWF, which is something which is kind of unheard of today, right?
Knowing that anything that Tyson does, it's $1 million.
The next night I saw Kevin, first thing I said to Kev was, you feel the water? It's getting cold.
In other words, we're on our way to the iceberg.
Me and Disco Inferno, we thought The Rock was cool. And we thought Steve Austin was cool. And me and Disco were always in the back watching them, backstage, and we would get heat. Why are you watching the show? Because it's better than ours.
There you go.
At that time, I really did not give a
Bischoff, he remembers the big crowds and he was the kingpin. But the truth of it is he never knew anything about wrestling.
And then towards the end, basically, he was just yesing to Hogan. It was a disaster.
Eric Bischoff was a money mule in professional wrestling. Eric Bischoff is not a fucking creative genius when it comes to pro wrestling. He's not one of the greatest bookers of all time. Fucking led one of the most legendary promotions directly into the ground. And why is that? He gave creative control to one of the most selfish wrestlers of all time in Hulk Hogan. And when you're not making the decisions for your team and for your promotion, that is the kind of shit that's going to happen. Who controlled the creative in WWF at the time? It wasn't fucking Stone Cold. It wasn't The Rock. It was Vince McMahon and his writers and his team that propelled them to take WCW and ECW. Literally bought out the fucking competition. And it seems like the end of this episode is going to go into the 97 year, where it's the start of the Attitude Era. So probably in episode 2, we're going to hear more about that.
Was the bigger talent. Hogan was the guy that he was going to go with, no matter what.
That's the bond right there, Hogan and Bischoff. They're both accountable to each other. That's the secret, is that Hulk Hogan was basically the puppet master to Eric Bischoff. And Eric Bischoff, he was just a prop. And that's what killed WCW.
Everything looks easier from the outside, but once you get inside, you realize just how complicated and nuanced some things that appear to be so easy and so simple really are. Who's responsible for killing WCW? Just look at some of the names who are floating around at the highest levels of internet broadcasting. They wanted WCW to go away. They got their wish.
You're leading a night and now you're not leading a night. There's reason for concern.
We hit a small brick wall. The wheels started falling off creatively.
What the is this?
WWE's answer was attitude.
So, the answer in 97 was the attitude.
That's exactly what we're going to do to kill you off.
Why are we doing this? Is this classy enough for our networks?
That pissed me off.
They started to handcuff us for standards practices.
You say what on TBS? I'm not convinced that wasn't an orchestrated hit job.
I don't think that's debatable.
There are too many conspiracies behind the scenes trying to knock him off.
Once you have the monkeys running the zoo, you're in trouble.
Woo! The brother was in the water and the sharks were coming to get him.
That's the name of the game. People will try to manipulate.
And who prevailed?
Booker T said the blood was in the water and the sharks were coming to get it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this episode. So it looks like on episode 2, we're going to find out more about the Attitude Era and kind of that decline of WCW right around there, because as soon as the fucking Attitude Era kicks in 97 for WWF, I mean, like I said, you look at some of the names that they created, Stone Cold, The Rock, fucking... You had the Hardys, you had Undertaker, Kane, Mankind, Kurt Angle. The list goes on, ladies and gentlemen. But it looks like we're going to find out more about that in episode 2. They said new episodes every Tuesday, so it's going to be a 4-part series. We just might watch it next Tuesday, ladies and gentlemen, because I probably am going to skip the next NXT, considering Sexy Red might make an appearance. So I will be going live tomorrow, everybody. We'll be live for Friday Night SmackDown, our watch-along. Thank you for sitting with me, watching a little bit of pro wrestling history, as we still have to determine who killed WCW. My fucking money's on Eric Bischoff. Hulk Hogan has also got his name in the hat. But Hulk Hogan wasn't the fucking president. He wasn't the fucking promoter. He was just given creative control the second he signed on the fucking dotted line. So it's still kind of all leading to Eric Bischoff, but 3 episodes left in this series. Thank you, everybody, for watching with me tonight, and I'm going to end the stream here on YouTube right now. So, okay, that is our stream for YouTube.